Welcome. We're live from beautiful North Education 273 here on the campus of San Diego State University. I'm Bernie Dodge, and with me in the room are students from my Simulation and Games class at Tech 670, and some other classes, and some faculty, and there's a much larger group watching at a distance, our own distance students, and at least one other class at another institution that shall be revealed later. We're here to see and talk and chat with John Keller. John Keller is universally known as the creator of the ARCS model. He received his doctorate at Indiana University and began his career as an academic at Syracuse University, and then completed his career as an academic, if completing is really the right word for it, at Florida State, where he is professor emeritus. While John was at Syracuse, I was lucky to be a doctoral student there, and was really lucky to be present for the birth pangs, to witness the birth pangs of the ARCS model. John was there for me also to guide my first workshop and my first conference presentation and my first and last dissertation. So we're really happy to have you here, John. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it. I would also say that during that time at Syracuse, I was lucky enough to have you as one of my doctoral students. You know, I've always appreciated, I still use some of your materials, and we'll see some of those tonight. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for inviting me.
Well, so we're here in San Diego, and I know you have some history with San Diego, but I don't remember exactly what it was. So what's your tie to this beautiful
Okay.
city?
Well, you would not be able to remember some of it, because my first tie to San Diego was in 1943, and you can show the first picture. That was when my little brother and I traveled to San Diego with my mother to join my father, who was in the Navy. And is that picture going to come up?
Yeah.
Can you see it?
We're seeing it.
Oh, well, I have that website up, Ustream, but I'm not seeing anything. All right. Well, anyway, in that picture, I have to say that I did not get to have a choice in the wardrobe that my mother picked out for me. All right. In the second interaction with San Diego was when we moved back to San Diego from Oklahoma in 1953, and I attended Hoover High School. You can show picture number 2, where this time I did have more choice over my wardrobe. I have on the obligatory coral sweater, charcoal gray pants, and white buck shoes. All right. Then after graduating from high school, I went to San Diego State for 1 semester, but decided I wasn't really ready for college yet. So I went into the Marine Corps, and you can show picture number 3. This is a picture of me when they loaded us onto buses to take us up to help fight forest fires in the Santa Monica Mountains, and which was not a fun experience. All right. Well, then after that, after getting out of the Marine Corps, I was abundantly ready to go to college, and did my undergraduate degree at University of California at Riverside. Then was teaching at Granite Hills High School. You can show picture number 4. I taught English, and well, before that I taught at another high school near Riverside. But at Granite Hills, I taught 11th grade English. I had an experience there that led to some of my subsequent work interests in technology. In the Marine Corps, I worked on training devices. I worked on flight simulators, both maintenance and instructor, and they were analog computers at the time. They were just introducing digital computers shortly before I got out. At San Diego State, at Granite Hills High School, I applied for and got an innovation grant. And in my English classes, all of them, I had to make films, single concept films, 3 minutes or less, or if they wanted to buy their own film, that could be longer than that, because I wanted them to I wanted to demonstrate to them that there are commonalities in the communication process, no matter what medium you're using. This was in the days of the media as the message and all that kind of stuff. So I made them write scripts and do advanced planning. Some objected, why can't we just be creative? And I said, well, if you have a goal and a purpose, you're going to deviate from your script, but you'll end up with a much better film. Well, that turned out to be very successful. And then during my last couple of years at Granite Hills, department head and I worked out a plan where we could teach electives, during the senior year and junior year for students that had room in their schedules to take them. So I taught a course on science fiction and another one on media, multimedia, as that term was defined at the time. All right. So then that kind of ended my experiences in San Diego until I've been back for some conferences and things.
Well, thanks. Wow, that was stuff I didn't know at all. Although I remember you came out here in the 80s to do some work for the Navy, and it was nice to spend a little bit of time with you at that point.
Yeah.
My own experience with, just as kind of a segue, when I first arrived at Syracuse, I remember speaking with my first advisor, Gus Root, and in the conversation I said that one of the things I was interested in was motivation, and I expected him to say something like, "Ooh, that's nice," but instead he said, "What do you mean by motivation? What motivation to do what? What is motivation?" And I was taken aback because, well, I guess that's when I realized that grad school is not exactly like the real world, where you really have to know what you're talking about. You have to be crisp with your definitions and so on, and just having something sort of aspirational to say wasn't enough. So what is motivation? You've certainly spent your career clarifying it for the rest of us. What is it?
Well, the technical definition is very simple. It's that which explains the direction, persistence, and intensity of behavior. In other words, the goals you set, the effort you spend to achieve them, and your persistence in trying to achieve them. But I think so that's the kind of quasi-scientific definition. But I think more than that, as I mentioned in that first article I wrote a long time ago, I think that it's that which defines the spirit or the energizing force within people. That which explains why some people will devote themselves so diligently to pursuing something they really want. It helps explain why we run away from things, if we're not in a mood to pursue them, or why we don't do anything at all, And so it's all of those things. And of course, the effort has been to try to operationalize it, as I mentioned in the first definition.
So, and a lot of the writing about motivation is really descriptive. It's really about people, and it's about what makes them tick and make them do the things they do. But as designers, we're more interested in prescriptively changing the environment to maximize motivation. And I remember it was back when I was still there that the term motivational design, we first began using it and hearing it. So how would you define that?
Yeah, well, to me, motivational design consists of marrying a systematic design process with a model of motivation that defines the motivational characteristics, the measurable motivational characteristics that you're trying to change, and in terms of a goal that you're trying to accomplish. So we can talk about motivational design in support of stimulating and sustaining motivation to learn, motivational design in support of motivation to work, or self-motivation, all of those things. But I think the key attribute of the motivational design process is the incorporation of a systematic design model.
A lot of the people in this room are reading your book from last year, which I found very exciting because you really have spelled out a step-by-step process for really thinking about motivation, integrating it with instructional design at all points in the process. And in our class, we're doing some motivational makeovers of existing classes. So it'll be very interesting to see how well your process works at fixing all these unmotivating classes that are out there. One of the things I would like to hear, I think graduate students at the master's level at least sometimes hear models like the ARCS model and almost treat them as if they came down on stone tablets, that they aren't, that they sprang full blown from somebody's head, but of course, having been there, I know that the process is messier than that. So I'd like to sort of talk about the process of making models in general and the ARCS model in particular. What was it like being a faculty member at Syracuse back at that time. You were brand new. That was your first academic job.
That's right. Yeah, and it was a challenge. It was exciting, but it was also a struggle. I mean, I would say that the prototypical model for a doctoral graduate going into a faculty position is that they continue with some variation of work that their mentor, their major professor, was doing. So it gives them a good foundation for starting and continuing their work. In my case, I didn't have a mentor. I mean, nobody else was doing what I was doing. At Indiana, none of my committee members was fully involved in motivation. So I had Tom Schwinn, who was an instructional designer. I had an educational psychologist, Richard Pugh, who did institutional research. I did work on a study on locus of control with him. And there was a professor in the organizational behavior industrial site program, which was my minor, who introduced me to learned helplessness. And that's what I did my dissertation on. So after I got to Syracuse, I was like, how am I going to start? At Indiana, I built my apparatus for my research out of it was one of those build your own computers. You have AND gates, OR gates, all these little aluminum boxes. You plug into a chassis and then you wire them all up to build a circuitry that supports the logic that you had to develop in a logical diagram. I didn't have any of that kind of equipment. So it was a struggle. And when I would tell my colleagues, what my interests were and what I would want to research, it was, why do you want to study that? That's so ephemeral. How can you get anything solid built of it? But that's where my passion was. And so the real catalyst that got me going, in terms of a firmer sense of direction was, did you know Vince Tinto at Syracuse?
Yes.
He was in the foundations department.
Yeah.
He stopped by my office one day and he said, John, I said, what? He said, can you recommend a measure of motivation to me? And I said, a measure? I said, well, I can recommend 8 or 9, but I can't recommend one. There's a measure of need for achievement, measure of locus of control, and so forth and so on. So anyway, after he left, I started thinking, and that was the catalyst that led me to realize that in our field of instructional design, we hadn't really dealt with motivation at all. Gagne said get people's attention in his events of instruction, and that's all it meant, get their attention. And then we had the behavioral theorists that we used for reinforcement theory, and that was it. So I decided I really want to ask the question if it's possible to synthesize the literature on motivation, and is it possible to synthesize it in a way to make it useful? And I had no idea if it was possible or not. But that's when I called together, I think I'm jumping ahead to another question, but that's when Bernie and Ron Loiacono and Bob Hunter and Judy Trabert and probably some others, we started a seminar, and each of them took a chunk of the motivational literature and started doing research on it, and eventually we were able to get it all synthesized.
And Syracuse seemed to be a good place to do that sort of thing. It's sort of the un-San Diego. It's painfully cold. It's dreary, and so it behooved us to stay indoors and do a lot of reading. But also the faculty at Syracuse at that time, that was kind of an amazing period. Dick Clark was there, Don Ely, like one of the earliest educational technologists, and Gus Root, Tom Nielsen, an incredibly creative guy. There was this mix just by happenstance.
It was a nice mix.
Very good people. Yeah, it was a nice time.
I do want to say something else about what it was like to be a new faculty member, and even after my first 3 years, and working with graduate students was just one of the things I really enjoyed. And please put up picture number 6. And Bernie, this is a picture of Bernie at that time, and so. Not exactly a freshman. I mean, he had a few years under his belt. And I remember him coming into my office at the beginning of one semester, telling me what a difficult time he was having finding an apartment near the campus. And I said, well, why? And he says, well, everything goes fine when they interview me until I tell them I'm a student. And they said, oh, we only rent to adults. So anyway.
Where did that picture come from?
Huh? I don't know. I don't
recognize me, but I don't recognize that picture. Well, anyway, Yeah, it was, life as a student there was, well, it was unlike here, for example, a lot of us were full-time students, and so we could just really throw ourselves into this business. But what a daunting task you took on there. I mean, because the motivation literature was just a mess. It was like 48 different ways to say the same thing with articles that never cited each other. It was really quite a challenge for you, wasn't it?
That's right, it was, and that's one of the things that having the workshop or the seminar that I developed with you guys was so helpful, because in fact I think the motivation research was characterized by scores, and I think I'm not exaggerating when I say scores, of many theories, single concepts. There was no underlying unifying concept that could tie it together the way there is in the literature and the research on ability. All the different Guilford, all the different people that talk about ability have measures that have a fair degree of correlation, and there was some sense of an underlying construct that represented ability, but that wasn't true with motivation. So there was need for achievement, locus of control, learned helplessness, then the list went on and on and on. And I think the best way to represent it, if you'll put up picture number, what is it? Number 4. Yeah, number 5, sorry. Number 5. This is a diagram that Bernie prepared for one of my classes, and for an article he wrote, a document he wrote. And so in this island, see, it's significant that he has the motivational concepts on an island, because that research was rather isolated from the mainstream of research on learning and instruction. And as you can see in the north, there's kind of a eroding peninsula, and these are Bernie's own words, of rat studies, and an almost impenetrable mountain range separated this region from the rest of the island. And so then you can see there's a passageway it's on the west side, I guess, that leads from those behavioralistic studies into the neo-behaviorist highlands. So there we're getting a little bit more elevated, and the neo-behaviorists begin to allow for actions other than just strict, narrowly defined stimulus response characteristics as helping to explain motivation. And then Berline, Berline, of course, you're familiar with from reading about curiosity. And then as you move on down into the map there, you get into the coast of cognition. A lot of motivational theories have a very strong cognitive basis. It's popular sometimes to talk about cognitive and non-cognitive variables. One of our current faculty members at FSU does this, and she got that from a guy at ETS, whose name is slipping my mind right now. He's very well known, but he wrote about cognitive versus non-cognitive. A lot of people don't understand that motivation has very strong emotional affective components, but it also has very strong cognitive components, as in attribution theory and so forth. And then to the west are the planes of personality. Those are the cool people that incorporate some sociological theories along with psychological theories, and there's further development of curiosity and some of the other variables. And then as we move south, we get into the lush humanistic areas, touchy-feely, more theories that are more touchy-feely, more emotion-based and that kind of thing. But that I think has withstood the test of time very well.
I hadn't seen that map in years. You've had it redrawn. That's not my penmanship there. It looks a little like Middleearth.
I don't know. It's well, I can't remember. If it's not your original drawing, it's just simply an effort to enhance it a bit.
So having covered all that territory across all of that island and all those different disciplines, you're not particularly married to any one of those philosophies. You, in your book, describe yourself as neither a behaviorist, nor cognitivist, nor constructivist, nor Scientologist, or any of the other ists.
Right.
Talk about that some.
Well, as I and we reviewed the various theories, and this, my my point of view about this has its roots in my philosophy work as an undergraduate. We had to review the history. We had 4 semesters of history of philosophy, and in each semester we had to read philosophers in original translations. We had to identify their presuppositions and their supports, and critique their work. And that taught me that if you're going to compare theories, you have to get down to their presuppositions and then see what they explain and what they don't explain. And I found that each theory has an area of behavior that it explains the best, and none of the theories, behavioristic theory, cognitive theory, constructivist theory, none of those provides a complete understanding of human behavior. Now, there are advocates within each of those theories who are like the true believers. There are behaviorists who believe that they can generate an adequate explanation of human behavior based on the observations of actions and reactions and consequences. But I think that the literature pretty well now demonstrates that probably isn't possible. So what my goal was to find out if we could synthesize the various theories, and organize them according to what area of human behavior they explain best. And that's what led to the development of that macro model that I've published, that arrays them all, not in conflictual ways, but in terms of the sum total of them, providing a more comprehensive explanation of behavior. And that's why I can't really get on board when people start arguing about constructivism versus behaviorism. I mean, behavioral psychology provides the most parsimonious explanations there are for how consequences sometimes influence behaviors, and it provides a very adequate basis for some types of instructional design. Whereas cognitive psychology gets more into kind of the humanist tradition of wanting to help people understand their frames of reference and how to grow their frames of reference and become more independent thinkers. So each of those theories has objectives, can be tied to learning objectives that it helps one accomplish. So it's by using each of them in an appropriate way that I think provides the strongest base of support, especially for people like us working in instructional design. What method, what technique is going to best serve us in trying to achieve a certain goal? And you can look across the array of theories to find which one works best.
It reminds me a little bit about of one of the other texts that we're using in this class. Jesse Schell has a book on game design, and because that also is kind of rich and very complicated, rather than try to come up with a theory of everything, he has each chapter as a lens through which to look at the design of a game and the way people play games and so on. It really that's a great strategy, I think, for wrestling this complexity into something more useful.
Yeah.
I remember that wrestling process. I don't remember the details, but I know that ARCS, those 4 clumps and those 4 letters were not the first 4, I don't think.
That's right.
Can you describe, do you remember exactly what that process was?
Yeah, when we first did the synthesis and the 4 categories seemed to emerge, at least from a theoretical perspective, they were labeled as interest, relevance, expectancy, and outcomes. But that acronym of that is IREO, which sounded a little bit too much like Old MacDonald had a farm. And so I wanted to come up with labels that were conceptually, theoretically valid, but provided an acronym that was easier to remember. Because that's, I had quite a bit of background in marketing, and having a label that's memorable and easy to use can really help promote the learning, and communication of the model. So we fussed around quite a while and came up with that acronym, which actually I've always felt was more accurate than the original one.
Could have been CAR, it could have been SCAR, it could have been, and in fact, ARCS itself had an unfortunate, in the early 80s, was related to AIDS there for a while, not commonly used now, but I guess it's tough picking an acronym like that. But that one seems to stick. That's the one that people know.
Yeah,
And I think most people know it mostly at the sort of one PowerPoint slide level of understanding.
that's right.
But
And often people, when I Google and read entries about the ARCS model, most of them are just like one-screen presentations of the four categories, and they totally miss the importance or the idea that the motivational design process is hugely important as a part of the ARCS model.
this may be like asking you which of your kids is your favorite, but if you had to pick one of the four to be the most important or the most interesting or the most useful, which would it be?
I know that I've been asked that a lot through the years. And I would say that it's a situation-specific question. You know, if I'm in a classroom where people are so frightened they can't even write a coherent sentence, then I would say that my favorite part of the ARCS model is confidence and how to improve their confidence. But if I'm in a classroom where people are just, don't see any connection at all between what they're supposed to be learning and what's being taught, then relevance is most important. If they're bored to tears, it's attention. The point is that each of those four categories represents a section of the literature. We created those categories by identifying as many motivational variables as we could, and we did kind of a qualitative cluster analysis, putting things together based on what they had in common and how they were different from the other things. So each of them is, in theory, equally important. In fact, the one that's most important is the one that's most related to the motivational problems you're dealing with in a given situation. Now, David Jonathan and Means, one of his students, did a study, and they were proposing that relevance was the most important variable. And if you read their study, they did find some support from that. But on the other hand, if you take a really hard look at the stimulus materials they used, they were not restricted to relevance. In other words, the other dimensions of motivation were kind of built into them too. So they did not really disprove the importance of all four categories.
So the things we were reading in that windowless room in Syracuse way back when, that was the literature of the 70s, and I know you've kept reading because the references in your book continue through the years. But and I know that a little bit later you added a V to the ARCS model. And say a little bit about Volition, because as I read that, it struck me as powerful and useful and not widely known.
Yeah, that happened just a few years ago when a doctoral student from Germany came over to study with me for a while, Marcus Diamond, and he was really knowledgeable about the literature on volition and the German motivational theorists. I had incorporated them, Kuhl and some others, earlier in my work, but I hadn't done it recently. Another German, Hermann Ausleitner, had come before him, and we worked together on motivational theory and future orientation and those kinds of things. But Marcus introduced me to some of the recent and current research on volition, which has a lot in common with self-regulation, But the thing was that the motivational theory primarily explains the initiation of behavior. What's important to you and the choice of a direction to take and so forth. Now, it can also explain persistence. If you're highly motivated, you'll continue to persist toward achieving a goal. But volition targets more closely that which explains the persistence of behavior. The action control strategies, the kinds of things you can do to on your own behalf through self-motivation or in support of learners to help them maintain their commitment to achieve their goal.
So are you going to, if that was a late addition to ARCS, and it's really not pronounceable to add that V, are you going to continue to elaborate on that? Or is that...
I probably will. I just call it the ARCS V model.
ARCS V.
And my first introduction to it was in a conference in Japan in 2007 at a joint Korean-Japanese conference near Osaka. And I introduced it there, and they really liked it. And they said, "Oh, is this the first time you presented it?" And I said, "Yes." They, "Oh, wow, we're the inaugural audience," or something like that. And then I presented it in a keynote speech to the Coast Guard in a training center in Norfolk, where they do their performance systems analysis. So, and then I've written an article about it, a rather extensive article on the integrated model. Did I send you a copy of that?
Yes.
I certainly can. It was in 2008.
Right.
But I was already well into writing the textbook, so I kept it as the ARCS model with just the brief overview of the volition part at the beginning. But and that really ties together two streams of research, you know, and the self-regulation theory and the, you know, with Corno and I forget the other guy's name right now. But anyway, so that was exciting to work with Marcus and add a whole new dimension to my work.
And your work, the model itself has taken on a life of its own. And I wonder though, and this would be probably an impossible question to answer, but what if looking at the literature as it is today, as opposed to in the 70s, yet you were to start all over and try to impose some order on what we know about human motivation, would there still be 4 or 5 clumps, or would it be something else?
I think that the model has been remarkably stable. And I did a research fellowship in the Netherlands quite a long time ago. And I had a meeting with a fellow in Amsterdam who had done extensive qualitative research in the schools, talking to kids about what interested them about school, what disinterested them, you know, if they didn't go to school, why they didn't go, what was important to them. And he had volumes of qualitative data, and then he, in doing his analysis, you know, his qualitative analysis, he had categories that were extremely similar to the ARCS model. So that was kind of a raw empirical approach to coming up with something that was similar. And I find that in the motivational literature, even now, the basic concepts are still there and still being researched. And so I think probably a very similar model would have emerged. I would have used the same approach, you know, just looking at each published concept and theory, listing its primary attributes, and then trying to cluster the different groups. Probably use a more quantitative multivariate approach now than just a qualitative approach. And so Ruth Small, you know, and one of her students they also did a study and found, you know, looking at asking students on all these various variables about the perceived distance and closeness of them, and some kind of analysis, and they came out with the same categories also.
Oh, interesting. The model's been applied and probably misapplied in lots of different areas. What are some of the more interesting places where you've seen the model used well?
Let me think. I need to orient myself here. I think, well, one recent one that comes to mind is in North Ireland, a lady who's, you can do a doctoral degree in midwifery there. You know, it's a nursing degree, but it focuses on midwifery. And she had contacted me through the, you know, internet, email, asking me some questions. Well, to make a long story short, you know, I ended up getting to go over there and work with her. And she's developed what she calls designer breastfeeding workshop and program. It's more than a workshop. And so I think that's an area that's really totally unexpected, in which somebody would apply the ARCS model, but it's been highly successful. In medical education, you know, it's been used by various people. This summer I did a workshop for a medical education association in Japan on the ARCS model, and also a one-day on instructional design. And I'm going to do a keynote speech for Japan Royal Nursing Society educators or something next August. So I've really gotten kind of involved in medical education. I've had people use it, let's see, in motivation to work, personal motivation. In Brazil, the lady that she runs a private school teaching English, and so she incorporated it in curriculum design for the teaching of English as a second language. Let's see, those are just a few that come to mind right offhand.
Let me, at this point, remind people who are not in the room but at a distance that if they have a question that they would like to present to John, please type it into the chat box. Devin is here. I'm blocking him right now, but there's Devin. And he'll relay those into the room so that we can get them posed to John. Similarly, those of you in the room, if you have some questions, please get them ready, because we're going to move towards Q&A fairly soon. I mentioned that workshop that you and I did because I think it might be a good example of the limits of trying to be mindful and planful about motivation. It was, I'm sure you remember it, it was the first workshop I ever did as an educational technologist, and it was a small college that shall remain nameless in Pennsylvania, where only after we arrived, they wanted us to talk about motivation, and only after we arrived did we learn that half the faculty was suing the administration. Nobody liked anybody. Students were all just ticked off having to miss classes or anything. And they wanted us to come in, be all sunshiny, and talk about motivation. And it was really one of the worst experiences I've ever had as an educator.
Me too. I'm going to tell you how that developed, and there's an important object lesson there for not just doing motivational workshops, but any kind of instructional design. Anytime you're preparing to design and implement an intervention on anything with people. What happened was that a fellow who, well, I'm not going to leave him nameless, is Scott Shablock. You remember him? He's the one who we'd done some work with in Syracuse. And he said, well, I have this opportunity for you, to do a workshop on your ARCS model at this college in southern Pennsylvania. Isn't that where it was?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, they're faculty members. It's a summer institute, and they get paid for attending, and they would love it. So I said, oh, okay. So I found it's a 2-day workshop. So Bernie and I worked like crazy to get it all put together. And after we got down there, and started implementing the workshop, you start having that feeling after an hour and a half or so, and and I would explain something, and then this one professor, raises his hand and asks a very professorial question, which means he talked for 5 or 8 minutes and ended it with a question mark, and he talks about, well, you're trying to talk about locus of control or whatever it is, and people have been talking about motivation for years. You talk about curiosity, but Aristotle talked about man is born to wonder, and he went on and on and on and on. And I thought, oh my God. And so then this just kept going on, this stuff back and forth. And then that's when the cold sweat starts to drip down the inside of your armpit, and you're really in trouble. And later that day, I had a migraine, but we kept going, or a bad headache. I don't know if it was a migraine. And that's when we began to find out what Bernie already explained. And what that taught me was the absolute importance of needs assessment, audience analysis, and getting data directly from the source, directly from the participants or from people who work with them very closely before you take second or tertiary input as to what you should do in a given project.
Probably if we had that data, and if we had known, we certainly would have done a better job. But I think now, if I knew what I know now about that group at that time, I would have said, oh, sorry, I can't be there. I'm going to have a headache that day, and not even try. So I guess the larger question is, where are the limits of what we can do in terms of motivational design? What are the situations where really there's not much we can do except hope for the best? What
That's
are
right.
the limits of the model?
There are limits. I'll add just a footnote to that other story, which was that what we found out was that, yeah, not only were some of them suing the administration and all this, but the only reason that a lot of them were there was because they were getting paid to attend the summer workshop. And they were isolated in this, historically black school. They weren't all black, they were all different nationalities, but it was something to do, something to pick up a little money. They had absolutely no interest in our workshop. So I think, yeah, recognizing the limits, if I'd known, like you said, if we'd had adequate information, and if I'd been smart enough then to know better, I wouldn't have taken that on. One principle is don't try to motivate people who are already motivated. You know, one of the benefits of the ARCS model is that as you do the research on your audience analysis, you know, and if people are already motivated, then just focus on efficiency. Teach them what they want to learn and get them out of there. And only use motivational tactics to the extent that you need them to sustain their motivation so that you don't kill it. And that's where the ARCS model can help you be more parsimonious in your selection of motivational tactics. At the other extreme, yeah, there are situations where you cannot motivate people. In a workshop one time, I had somebody with AT&T or some company like that and said, well, you know, I've got these 3 senior technicians in my office, and I can't get them motivated, and I want you to tell me how to do it. I said, okay, well, after asking him to tell me about them, well, they were senior level men. Their job was totally secure. They had very high salaries, and they were just waiting for retirement, you know. And so I had no answer. I said, well, I don't think there is anything you can do. So I mean, that's right. There are times when you have to recognize your limits. Another thing that I think is critically important is, and this is one thing I'll say about Scott Schablock that I learned that was very valuable, which is to create a sense of a felt need in the audience. In other words, if the audience doesn't have their own perception of a gap, their own perception of something they want to learn, then you need to help create that for them. Because if there's no perceived gap, there's no reason to want to learn anything. So that motivational exercise I did that I presented at the beginning of chapter 3 or 4 or something on what interests you and what doesn't interest you about courses, you know, what's got your interest. That exercise helps create a sense of what people already know about motivation. You know what has motivated you in a class, what has demotivated you. Now, why can't you just use that knowledge to make your own instruction motivating? And then people say, yeah, but I know what I like, but I don't know what somebody else likes. And you know, in other words, they'll come up with several answers. And then I say, yeah, okay, so now that tells us what there is that we can learn from this lesson. Because if you just start talking about the ARCS model to people, they'll say, oh, that's self-evident. You know, that's obvious. So you have to get them to articulate what they know and where the gaps are before they'll listen to what they don't know, instead of just listening for confirmation of what they already know.
One of the useful things I found in the book, I'd forgotten about these, but there they are, ready for reuse and repurposing. You have 2 instruments in there, one for measuring people's motivation with respect to a course, and another for looking at materials. Are you happy with those instruments? Talk about some of the ways in which they've been used and how we might use them.
Yeah, they've held up well. You know, they've and there are shortened versions of them. But it's one of the things that people don't understand is that these are situation-specific measures. They're not measures of motivational constructs, and consequently, if you do a factor analysis, the 4 parts of the surveys are sometimes highly correlated, but sometimes they aren't. It depends upon what the motivational conditions are in the audience. If the audience feels the material is highly relevant and they feel a strong lack of confidence, then the instruments will detect that, so that you can use them for diagnostic purposes and also to measure outcomes at the end. The items can be reworded to match the situation. So instead of saying this course, you could say this, this
webinar.
Podcast, or
Yeah, this webinar.
Yeah, this webinar, whatever, and make it situation specific. And you can also, there are shortened versions of them that are available. But the critical thing to understand is, another critical thing is that those items were not just selected, out of the sky. I reviewed all of the existing motivational measurement instruments for the different constructs that are synthesized within the ARCS model. And we selected items that seem to capture the key attributes of each of those, like attribution theory, locus of control, need for achievement, and so forth. And then we went through a development process to winnow them down and validate them. So it's here again, there's another scale by the MSQ something or other that's a very good scale, and it also includes a measure of self-regulation. But this one is very easy to use, very convenient, and it's been translated, used in a lot of different countries.
Yeah, now that I'm reminded of it, I'm going to be adding it to my arsenal of instruments at the end of the courses I'm teaching this semester. This might be a good time to see if we have any questions in the room. Anyone here? If you have a question, please key your mic. Raise your hand so we know where to aim the camera first. They're just dumbfounded, Don.
Well, you were asked. Oh, is he ready?
Somebody have a question?
You asked me about
Yes.
my some of my work in Japan, which has had a strong influence in my career. And if we could talk about that now or a little bit later, if people have
We
questions.
do have a question.
Hi, Dr. Keller. I wanted to know about the repetition of the ARCS model. So if you have, I'm a classroom teacher in middle school, and to get attention and motivation and relevance day after day after day with the same people. So if you have just any pointers about recycling the model in every lesson that I do.
Well, there's several parts to my answer to that question. First of all, as an experienced teacher, you can probably recognize rather quickly, without having to go through 10 or 11 worksheets, where the challenges are going to be in a given lesson with respect to whether it's going to be boring for the class, or they're not going to see the relevance, or whether they're going to be anxious. So the ARCS model with the 4 categories, once you become familiar with it, you can use it very quickly in an informal way to help organize your thoughts about where you need to put the emphasis in a given lesson. Another thing that's important, of course, is looking in the mirror, because often, the recycling process, when you're teaching the same, teaching day after day after day, ask yourself, do I think this lesson's interesting? Is it something that I think has some curiosity stimulating things in it? Do I think it really has relevance for the students? And if you don't have a good answer for those things, then you need to do some things to stimulate yourself first, so then you can think of ideas and things to do with the students to pass along your own motivation to them.
What I heard buried in that question was something about teacher motivation too, in that sometimes we'll have a lesson that really works year after year with students, but we get tired of it, and so our own motivation sort of becomes drained. We have some questions coming in from online, so let's hear from Devin on what those are.
Okay, yeah, we actually have quite a few questions here. I'll start with this first one that I'm looking at, maybe out of order. This is from Ruth Small. She says, "Hi, John. I find the ARCS model very versatile. Could you describe some ways that ARCS has been used outside of education?"
Yeah, I described one in the North Ireland in the designer breastfeeding course. It's been used in the military training, which is still education, but it's a totally different, not totally, but it's a very different environment. It's been used in terms of motivation to work, to guide motivation in the workplace. And a student at Syracuse when I was up there, who's Morris, David Morris, I think it was, he used it as a guideline for developing. He developed some workshop on teaching people, to do public speaking, and he used it as a guideline for how to develop motivational speeches and talks. So those are the ones that come to mind at first. And hello, Ruth, to you too. Nice to hear from you.
Okay, so the next question I have here is from Allison Rossett. She asks, Dan, what about Dan Pink's work on motivation? What do you think about that?
Whose work?
Dan Pink. Do you know? Well, maybe.
Give me a few words about what he's doing.
Okay, she says. Something. She also follows up. She says, when you've written about motivation, is it mostly about enterprise motivation on systems influencing organizational results? And this is also from Allison. I'll look into Dan Pink here.
Well, I think that when you start talking about enterprise level motivation and how it ties in with performance and performance systems design, then I haven't really done that much at that level myself with the ARCS model. I focus primarily on motivation to learn, but the performance systems design literature and some of the traditional motivational theorists, come into play when you start working at that level. But it has to be part of an integrated, holistic systems approach. You can't just work on motivation by itself in isolation from other factors.
Yeah, Ruth Small said a little bit earlier about Dan Pink's work that it was greatly influenced by Ed Dece's work on self-determination theory at University of Rochester.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Ed Dece's work in intrinsic motivation and competency.
Okay.
Do you have another question in the room?
Yes.
Yeah, you want.
Hi, John. I work doing classroom instruction and also work at a museum. I feel like sometimes we're actually doing an assignment based off of the stuff out of your workbook. And what I was thinking about yesterday was working on an assignment is I feel sometimes it's very easy to empathize with the audience that we would like to reach. But then I also wonder sometimes if it's easy to get stuck in a situation where you might start losing your objectivity because of that. And do you have any tips for trying to keep yourself grounded so when you do approach your audience analysis to then design your motivational strategies, a way to kind of keep us like that so that we don't go off course and overdo it or underdo it?
Okay. Yeah. First, I'm going to comment on you mentioned museums, and that's an area in which the ARCS model has been applied by numerous people in the design of exhibits and interactive exhibits for people to get their interest and keep their interest in museums. But I think in terms of keeping yourself grounded, I think by we all have favorite things we like to do, and like you were saying earlier, Bernie, about you have a particular type of learning strategy you use, and it's extremely successful, so you keep using it year after year. But then it gets so that you get tired of it too, and you need to make a change. But putting that back in the context of the current question, I think that again, the focus has to be on the audience. The more you're getting information from the audience, looking at the audience, looking at your content, finding out ways to make the content, activities and strategies that you find personally interesting, and that also then bridge the gap to what the actual condition of the audience is, then you're going to be grounded. I know, I can remember many times over the years when I had an activity that I thought was really cool, and I would develop it and prepare it, and as soon as I would start implementing it, I would suddenly realize, oh my God, this just isn't the right thing for this group at this time. And that's where thinking through the whole process of not only your own personal interest and excitement, but how it ties in, making sure it's connected to the audience's needs and interests is what keeps you grounded.
We have some more questions from online.
Okay, this one is, I believe it's from Brian. What real-world situation has shown the most challenge in utilizing your model, and why?
Well, we already talked about one of them that Bernie and I experienced together. Another one was, it was similar, but not quite as bad. I developed I did quite a bit of work with IBM during the years, especially in instructional design and job analysis and so forth. But I did a motivational workshop for sales and marketing people in IBM. And actually it was on the same weekend as the opening of the first Gulf War. So that was quite an exciting diversion to overcome in the workshop. But that workshop went extremely well. The sales and marketing people would catch on to the concepts quickly, look at examples, and it went extremely smoothly. Then I was asked to do the same workshop for a group in Atlanta of service, people that worked in service, engineers that would install and maintain the mainframe computers and so forth. And after I got started, I wasn't getting as much interaction from the audience. They weren't connecting as well, and I was really struggling with that audience. And I remember one, and I figured out what the problem. I got through it, but it was a struggle. And then in reflecting on it and talking to a couple of people, the idea is that engineers, they're very detail oriented. If they have a cable with 84 wires in it, and you're telling them how to hook that cable up to some piece of equipment, they want to know where each wire belongs. Well, if I would give them a general principle and a sample of 15 different tactics, they would want to know when and how to use each tactic. With the sales and marketing people, that wasn't a problem because they're used to taking a quick overview, getting the basic essence of something, and then knowing how to connect to their audience. So that was another example of not understanding my audience well enough before I embarked on the second workshop.
We have one more.
All right, I know we have quite a few here. This one's from Felicia. I'm interested to know, based upon the research, do adults typically need more or less motivation to learn?
Would you repeat that in here?
Yeah. Okay, it says, I am interested to know, based on the research, adults need to typically learn more or less motivation? Or I think she's trying to ask, do adults need more motivation than kids?
Oh yeah. I don't know if she's referring to those principles of adult learning, which most all of those by Knowles are the same things are true of kids. I think that here again, that's a situation-specific question. I don't think, in contrast to Knowles, I don't think most adults are that enthusiastic about going out and seeking education. Most people go to courses when they have to, for training, for recertification, for meeting their annual learning requirements and so forth. And I think that people typically want the learning experience to be not boring and be as brief as possible. So when you can, so in a sense, then I think with many adults, yes, it is important to stimulate motivation through some deliberate application of these principles. But here again, it's a situation-specific question. People working in medical simulations, for example, tend to be very enthusiastic about their work and about going to workshops and learning what's new and figuring out ways to apply it. People working in insurance, having to go take a course on all the latest state regulations, are going to be battling motivational challenges, all the way through. So you have a different kind of challenge as an educator to deal with that kind of situation. So I wouldn't generalize about whether adults typically have high requirements to, quote, be motivated or to have their motivation increased. It's a situation-specific question.
Okay, one more question. This is from Steve. Where is the breaking point for rewarding and overreading behavior? And I guess this is a two-part question. How do you find that early on?
Between rewarding and what?
And reading behavior.
Reading?
Yeah, maybe we can try a different question, or you can rephrase that. I have another one here. Which component is a priority in general, relevance or motivation?
Well, if I kind of put those two questions together, and if the first one was focusing on, how do we deal with like extrinsic reinforcement, and then how do you back off from that, and how do you know when you've done enough and so forth? Well, that's what Ryan and DC has written a lot about, and how to bridge from intrinsic motivation, or bridge from behavioral reinforcement into intrinsic motivation. But I don't think it's a linear process. Certainly, extrinsic reinforcements, for kids to brush their teeth and all those things can help establish the habit. But I think a lot of values orientation gets into that process. I mean, if the parents are brushing their teeth, and if they're obviously enthusiastic with the kid when the kid brushes the teeth, then the extrinsic reward helps. But ultimately, that's not the primary reinforcer. I think it's the social reinforcement that's most important. If you're trying to follow some linear process of beginning with extrinsic reinforcements and then bridging to intrinsic reinforcements, I don't think it's that simple or work quite that well. There's this huge overlay of social reinforcement, social support that goes with in building behavior, the extrinsic rewards.
Thanks, John. I think I can anticipate your answer to this, but the vehicles through which we teach, the media through which we teach, are way different today than they were in the 70s when ARCS was born. Does it make any difference if we're teaching, a blended class or using mobile learning? How does ARCS apply differently, or is it the same to those new media?
Yeah, that question. We can also couple that with the question about why the ARCS model has been successful in so many different cultures around the world. It's also successful in many different delivery systems. And I think it's because the ARCS model provides a basis. It's a problem solving model. It's not like Raymond Vlitkowski's model, which is more prescriptive. You do this at the beginning, you do this in the middle, and you do this at the end of instruction. But with the ARCS model, it provides a structure that helps you identify the essential motivational characteristics of people and the critical characteristics of the environment, how to recognize, identify what kind of motivational problems exist, and then build strategies that fit. For example, in the classroom, the people are right there in front of you. There's a social environment already built in. So it's a matter of what you do to develop a sense of presence and interactions among the students and so forth. In an online course, it's more difficult. The students are out there. One of the strategies that I developed in my online course was at the very beginning of the course, the very first assignment was to build their web page, which only took them 10 or 15 minutes. And then I had a set of questions, discussion questions about, for 4 different threads. What do you have in common with somebody else in the course? Talk about that in terms of background experiences. What's different about somebody's experience that you would like to know more about? And so I had like 4 prompts that generated a huge amount of interaction. Like with 20 students, I would get over 300 responses to these questions. And they weren't even graded, apart from just for that one, it was just a matter of having participated. And I had some students who'd say, it's really great to get to know you, Laura. We've been in 2 online courses together, but this is the first time I feel like I've really gotten to know you. And so that kind of an activity helped fulfill a huge motivational gap in that kind of a learning environment of the physical and distance and between people, and helped create a sense of community. And I know there's been research on that now. It's that social presence or something that I know in Korea and some other places they've done a lot of research on it. So I guess the pacing, the quantity of work, like I first tried to model the same kind of exercises in my online course that I did in my face-to-face course. I wanted to be equivalent. And boy, after a while, people were just really bombarding me, I wanted them to do something at the beginning of the week, and then I would react, and they would do something else at the end of the week. And people say, I'm working full time. I only log on once a week and do everything at once. And so I had to learn how to modify my assignments and my schedule of assignments to fit the audience. So I think it's that kind of capacity of the ARCS model as a conceptual shell to help you adapt to you're analyzing a given situation, figuring out what the problems are, what the gaps are, and then coming up with solutions where things are falling short.
So the model has a long future because no matter how we teach, it still seems to be applicable.
Well, it seems to have happened that way so far. And I tell you, after the original inception of the ARCS model and getting it introduced, I didn't really do a whole lot with it for a while there in my career. I was doing a lot of instructional systems projects with IBM and Citibank and some other organizations. And then suddenly I became aware that there were many, many articles being written in the literature about it. And it really kind of took on a life of its own. And then I tried to get back into it and start doing things to help promote it and advance it and so forth. And I would get emails from people all over the world, with wanting this or that or more information and that kind of thing.
Well, so let's hope that it continues to work even next year when we switch over to teaching by scratch and sniff holograms.
Yeah, if somebody comes up with something better, I mean, that's fine. I'm all for it. But so far, it seems to be holding up.
We unfortunately need to begin to bring this to a close. I'm remembering that in that seminar, you brought in Joel Rayner from, where was he, Cornell?
No, he was in Buffalo, at the SUNY Buffalo or something over there.
You brought him in, and his thing was future orientation and how knowing that you have a next step to achieve motivates people and how people's behavior changes when they get their last promotion and so on. So here you are. You were tenured, you're full, you're done, you've got your book finished, and yet I don't detect any lack of motivation for you to continue doing things. What's next? Now that the book is out?
Yeah, he made a strong distinction between getting chronologically old versus psychologically old. And some people get psychologically old when they're still very young, because they don't really have what he called a career path, a sequence of goals, each of which helps add incentive points to accomplishing a further goal in the future. And the way you stay psychologically young is to keep, as you approach the end of a path, you keep pushing it forward with new ideas, new things you want to do in life. And I guess that's kind of where I am now. I'm continuing with some of my work on the ARCS model and promoting it. I'm working on another book on that's more pragmatic, more practical, designed for teachers. And there's a lady with a lot of experience in teaching and workshopping that's going to work on it with me. I'm catching up on a lot of deferred maintenance around the house. I've always enjoyed doing physics projects with tools and building stuff. So I'm doing a lot of that and enjoying it. Spending more time with grandkids and that kind of thing. So I feel like I've got and my wife retires at the end of February. So we have a lot of plans for things we want to do.
Well, it's great to hear. It's great to see you again. I am certainly looking forward to the next 2 books. And before I forget, I want to thank, we have a 1-camera setup here, so I can't thank the people responsible for making this happen electronically, but Greg Koyematsu and Bob Hoffman have cobbled together this webcast studio they made it out of nothing, Apple IIs and marbles and paper clips, but it seems to have held up so far, so I want to thank them. But I also want to thank you, John. You've held our attention. It was all relevant. We're all leaving here more confident in our ability to motivate people, and I think we're all pretty satisfied. So thanks very much for spending your time with us, and I look forward to seeing you again.
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, and I do hope you'll share the results of some of your work with me. I read through the project descriptions that you're working on, and it reminds me of a lot of those descriptions that I've read over the years from my own classes. And there's some very challenging and very sophisticated goals among those projects. So I'll be very interested to see how some of that works out.
We'll keep
and I want to thank you. And I tell you, this has been a very enjoyable experience just from the organization and technological support. You know, these things don't always work out so well, but this has been, you know, Greg and Bob and everybody's made it very comfortable and easy to get set up with this. And I was in a state of absolute panic a half hour before it started because I'd lost my internet connection from my desktop computer. And but I mean, fortunately I got it back, but I was sweating. I couldn't figure out what was going on. So anyway, here we are, and it's been a great evening. I appreciate it.
We had a plan B. We were going to switch to the San Diego Zoo PandaCam if your connection hadn't come back. Again,
Well, I have a
thank you,
laptop
John.
I could use too, but anyway.
Okay. So long. Thanks.
Goodbye.